test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is your host, Siddhartha Vaidyanathan. I'm at Sidvi on Twitter. And it's a real honor for me to welcome our guest for the show, a former international cricketer who played 30 tests and 50 one-dayers for his country, but someone who, as it turned out, is remembered more for an act of immense moral courage when his country co-hosted the World Cup in 2003, when he chose to risk his career and, as it happened, his life, because he felt the need to speak up for what he believed in. A very, very warm welcome to the former Zimbabwe fast bowler and historically the first black cricketer to play Test cricket for Zimbabwe, Henry Olonga. Thanks so much for joining me, Henry.
Well, Siddhartha, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I hope your listeners will enjoy it.
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure they would. Some of them, of course, are young and may not know much, may not have followed much of your career, but I will tell them about it as we go along. We are here today to talk about what I consider to be one of the finest books written by a cricketer. It's called Blood, Sweat and Treason, and it was published in 2010, written by Henry, of course. And Henry is also coming out with an audio version of the book. It'll perhaps be released in a month or so, and where he himself is narrating the story. And I can't wait for that enough. And I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's an inspiring cricket story, but to begin with, but then it goes so much beyond cricket into philosophy, into politics, into sociology, and also the very essence of what it means to stand up for what one believes in. I do not know of any other cricket book, by a cricketer at least, that has quotes from Edmund Burke, Reinhold Niebuhr, as well as poems from Leo Buscaglia, Rudyard Kipling, and I'm yet to encounter another cricketing autobiography that's so erudite in the way it handles the fault lines beyond the boundary. Now, as I said, many of you listeners may not remember much from the 2003 World Cup. Some of you might have been toddlers back then, or some of you might not have really been following the happenings around the Zimbabwe cricket team at that time. But I must mention here that the big story of that World Cup was how Henry Olonga and his teammate, who is perhaps Zimbabwe's greatest cricketer, Andy Flower, wore black armbands or black sellotape bands when Zimbabwe took the field against Namibia for their opening World Cup match. Now, this was done as a symbolic protest because there was a white man in Andy Flower and the black man in Henry Olonga, the first black cricketer, as I said, who represented Zimbabwe no less, speaking their minds about what they thought was going on in the country. Now, there are just two bits that I want to quote, which will give you an essence of what they were trying to say. The first one is, I quote, "It is impossible to ignore what is happening in Zimbabwe. Although we are just professional cricketers, we do have a conscience and feelings. We believe that if we remain silent, that will be taken as a sign that either we do not care or we condone what is happening in Zimbabwe. We believe that it is important to stand up for what is right." And the second bit that I want to quote, which of course went on to make headlines all over the world, was that they said, in all the circumstances, we have decided that we will each wear a black armband for the duration of the World Cup. In doing so, we are mourning the death of democracy in our beloved Zimbabwe. Close quote. Now, this, of course, triggered an extraordinary response, including death threats to Henry and his family, which he has written about in detail in the book, and led him to announce his retirement toward the end of the World Cup, and also leaving Zimbabwe because he was fearing for his life. He spent some time in South Africa before some benefactors helped him fly to England, where he made a home for the next several years. It is also in England where he wrote this terrific book, I'm assuming. So, Henry, after this long introduction, I would like to ask you about this book. It came out in 2010, which is 7 years after the World Cup, 7 years after you quit Zimbabwe and after you quit cricket. And it seems to have been a culmination of a journey of deep introspection, because it's not written in haste at all. It's written with immense thought. So can you talk a bit about writing the book and the motivations behind that?
Well, I think initially it wasn't actually my idea. It was the idea of someone who was managing me at the time. I had a management company that said, listen, we think it's a good idea for you to write a book. We think it'll help get your profile out there, etc. So they were looking for more business from their perspective. And initially I was like, oh, I don't think I've lived enough. I think that's one of my first objections was I don't think I've got a big story to tell. And they disagreed.
Oh, if only you're known.
well, I mean, I'm now 46. So back then, I was obviously in my sort of mid to late 30s. And so with the passage of time, I think I can look back and reflect and say, well, I think I did have a few things to say. But anyway, eventually I came around to the idea, and they got me in touch with what's called a ghostwriter. And a ghostwriter is someone who helps you write your story, because I'm not an author. I obviously studied English to a high standard at school, but I don't think you can compare writing your life story to writing an essay. So I obviously would need some help in that regard. And a man called Derek Clemens helped me tell my story. So I went over to his house for maybe a couple of days, and I just told him my story from start to that time, which was 2009, 2010. It was verbal diarrhea. I just told him everything I could remember. And then, of course, with the passage of time, we added things, refined things, deleted things, and eventually came up with Blood, Sweat and Treason, my story, which you've referred to. So the story basically encompasses my life from my birth in Zambia to emigrating to Kenya, and then while we were there, experiencing the breakdown of my mom and dad's marriage, and then ending up settling in Zimbabwe, where I went to school. And that was the foundation from which I was able to get involved in cricket, athletics, rugby, stage, as in music and drama. And it was the country that I think, of all the countries I've lived in, really defined me as a person and helped me figure out what I wanted to do with my life. They were my formative years. I was extremely lucky that I went to good schools and I had good teachers, good coaches, and I was also given leadership positions in the schools. I was head boy in junior school and high school. I don't know if that makes any sense to people in America or all over the world, but Zimbabwe, country I grew up in mostly, was a British colony. So it was an old style education system. You had headmasters, we even had corporal punishment back in the day, and you had head prefects and head boys, etc. It was a boys only school. But that's also where I had a coach who saw the potential in me to be a decent cricketer at a decent standard, and he kept encouraging me to continue pursuing cricket, because I had a lot of interests at school. I had a lot of passions, and at one point I was going to be an athlete. I wanted to run in the Olympics representing Zimbabwe or Kenya. I think my promise lay in decathlon, because I could run fast, I could jump, I could throw. My one weakness might have been the pole vault, but I think everything else I was pretty good at. And unfortunately, that coach that saw potential in me as in athletics, his name was Atherton Squire. He ended up leaving the school, and replacing him was a man called Roy Jones, who was my first 11 cricket coach. And he's the one who sat me down one day at the basketball courts at Plumtree High School, overlooking the cricket pitch. And he chatted to me for 30 or so minutes. And he just gave me a vision. He gave me this idea that I think I hadn't really taken seriously. I was just playing cricket and enjoying it and not sure what I wanted to do when I left school. And he sold it to me. He said, listen, you can travel the world, get paid for doing what you enjoy, and, make a name for yourself. So I lay a lot of the responsibility of my rise in cricket due to him. But of course, this is a long story. There were lots of other people involved. Heath Streak's father saw potential in me when I was about 17, got me playing for a club side in the big city because my school was about 100 kilometers out of the city. They'd come pick me up, they'd drop me off, they'd help me. They promoted me as a schoolboy into the provincial team. Heath Streak himself, of course, there was some other fabulous players, another man called Wayne James, who many people wouldn't know Wayne James, but put it this way, if Andy Flower didn't exist, he probably would have been Zimbabwe's wicketkeeper batsman. And so he and many other friends and teammates would take me, pick me up from school. I'd play the matches, they'd drop me off, and were constantly encouraging me to grow in this world of cricket, playing amongst the big boys. And cutting a long story short, a year after, not even a year, a few months after leaving high school, I was making my debut against Pakistan. And it was bittersweet for me because, of course, it was the start of my career, which is a great moment. Politically, socially, it was very significant. First black player, as you said, I was the youngest at the time. That got surpassed later, but I was. It was our first test victory over Pakistan, but I also got called for throwing in that first match. So it was a weird debut by any measure, I think. And I ended up, as a result of that, having to remodel my action. So I went all over the world. The first place I went to was India, and I spent 3 or so weeks at the MRF Pace Foundation in what was called Madras back then. It's now called Chennai, of course. But I spent some time there with some wonderful coaches, a man called Shaker. I forget his first name. I don't know if he's still involved in cricket. I'm sure he must be somewhere as a coach or something. He may even have retired. But he was very good, as was, of course, Joel Garner and Dennis Lilly, who also came. They only came for a short time, maybe a few days. But the MRF Pace Foundation was a masterstroke by the Indian cricket authorities because, of course, they recognized that they lacked serious depth in the fast bowling department. And so they got, not only did they get MRF, this rubber factory company to sponsor it. I'm guessing billions of tires in India are MRF. I'm guessing. Anyway, with all the cash reserves they had, it was a masterstroke. They set up this academy, and they got Dennis Lilly, arguably one of the greatest fast bowlers of all time, and Joel Garner, part of one of the most potent pace attacks in history, to come over and give of their time. I'm sure it was paid, but give of their time to help the next generation of Indian bowlers. And of course, India then opened it up way back in 95 to the rest of the world. I'm not sure if it's still going. I'm not sure if it still opens up to the rest of the world, but I was there for maybe 3 weeks myself, a young bowler called Darlington Matambanadzio and a man called Brian Strang. And Brian Strang ended up playing Test cricket as well. Brian Strang was there because he was a very accurate bowler, but he was lacking in speed, shall I say. He was a medium pace bowler, and they wanted him to be just a little bit quicker. In my case,
we in India are familiar with the Matambanadzio name, by the way. Was he Everton's brother?
He was Everton's younger brother. He was Everton won't mind me saying this, but Darlington was better looking than him. And, and Darlington was an all-rounder, whereas Everton tended to be just a bowler. And I played, he was my contemporary. I don't know how often we played together in test matches, but we certainly played around about the same time. And he wasn't in the game for long, Everton. Maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they stopped picking him, and then he moved on in life, But he was a lovely guy. Both of them were really good, super players. They went to school in the capital city at a school called Eaglesvale, but I went to school, obviously, in a different province. We weren't as close to the establishment because cricket was run in Harare, the capital city. And so they were in the thick of everything. All the coaches, all the administration happened in the capital city. But they were two promising players and and I played Zimbabwe schools cricket with them as well. I'm jumping ahead in the story, of course, but when I played Zimbabwe schools cricket in my last year, I think I was picked for the national side at schoolboy level. Both of them were picked, if my memory serves me right. In any case, I was there for 2-3 weeks. I talk about how it was a cultural shock for me in my book, because of course it was, India's just full of color. There's a lot of goodness there, and there's also a lot of stuff that makes your stomach churn a little bit, because there's a lot of poverty. Of course, there's also a lot of suffering. People get sick. There's all sorts of things that are very confronting, and it was really eye-opening for me to travel to a place like that. Now, as a young boy, I had traveled to Europe, to 13 different countries as an 8 or 9-year-old, I think. And of course, Europe is a totally different experience. It's very clean. It's very modern. To a large degree, everything just works very well. But India, of course, has pockets of that sophistication. But back in '95, in a small part of Madras, it was very eye-opening. And I'm not saying that in a negative way necessarily. It was good to go to a different part of the world that was kind of similar to Zimbabwe, struggling with similar issues, but also had this great passion for the game. Of course, India's history in Test cricket and one-day internationals goes back to the 70s and 80s. We didn't have any of that heritage. We didn't have the history. We were starting to build it in the early 90s. I think we played our first couple of tests against Sri Lanka and India in the early 90s. And then
India was the first, yeah.
India was the first, was it? Yeah. I'm not a historian. I just know they were one of the first. But anyway, it was a really good experience for me to work with these great players and to be able to film my action for the first time as well. Because, we take it for granted now that you can just pull your phone out and you can record your golf swing or your bowling action at high frame rates, and you can slow it down. We didn't have that facility back in the day. You didn't have your own personal camcorder. I mean, we were amateurs when I started. I didn't have extra money. I was out of school. I didn't have a job. So it was so good to be able to look at the camera or the footage on the TV screen and say, that's what I'm doing. That's what I look like to other people. Because you don't know what you look like in your own body. You have to see it. And so, cutting a long story short, that was the first step in 3 different places I traveled to sort out my action. In '96, I went to Australia, and they also had an academy. I think it still runs here as well, but obviously it's moved around the country. So when I came, it was still in Adelaide, and it was run by Rod Marsh and a few other coaches. One of them was called Richard Doan. He was the biomechanics coach. I think he's actually in America now, coaching cricket at a high level somewhere. Another man called Wayne Phillips, and of course Dennis Lilly came again. And here's the funny thing is as I'm writing my book, or doing my audiobook, I should say, I'm starting to realize how many people that I worked with back in the day have died.
Yeah.
And of course, Rod Marsh is gone. And then the next year, I went to another academy in South Africa, and that was run by a man called Clive Rice, and he's dead.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the older you get, the more it's likely that a lot of your heroes and teachers and coaches are going to pass away. But it's so interesting. Another man from the academy in South Africa was a guy called Hilton Ackerman. He was H.D. Ackerman's father.
H.D. Ackerman, yeah.
H.D. Ackerman played for South Africa, and I don't know whether he played T20 or anything like that, but he's a name that cricketers may know. In any case, that was my final academy was in South Africa. And in 98 was when I really came back into the sport. So I carried on playing. They kept picking me here and there. In 96, I played against South Africa in a one-day tournament. I played against England in the Test series, and then 97. Actually, 97, I think I missed out a bit of cricket there because I injured my wrist. So I spent most of that time at the academy, but then I had a broken wrist, which I'd received the injury when I played in a warm-up match against England. And I didn't know I had a broken wrist, but I played throughout the series, the Test series. I picked up some wickets, but I didn't score any runs. But I didn't know I'd broken my wrist. I knew it was hurt, but I didn't think it was broken. I thought it was a bad sprain. And so when I was at the academy in South Africa, we did a medical, and I just mentioned to the doctor, "Oh, I've got a sore wrist," and they said, "Oh, we'll keep an eye on it." And then part of our training was to do some work with a punching bag, a boxing punching bag.
Yeah.
And it started to aggravate my wrist quite a bit. And it's the first time it actually got really painful. And so I mentioned it to the doctor. They did an x-ray and they said, "Oh, you've broken your scaphoid bone." Now, the scaphoid bone is one of a number of bones in the body that if you break them, it's very bad because the blood supply comes in on one end. And if you break it, it doesn't get to the end that's broken off. So, and it doesn't heal itself. There has to be some medical intervention. So I had an operation. A wonderful doctor called Mr. Bedalf he was a hand specialist in South Africa, and the South African cricket authorities paid for it with their insurance. I mean, my gosh, I'm so grateful because again, like I said, I wasn't paid. I was an amateur. I wouldn't have been able to afford an operation that expensive. But they covered it, and I ended up having a decent cricket career because if I hadn't had that operation, I think I would never have come back. In any case, the operation was successful, but it took 4 or so months to heal, and then back and forth, x-rays, etc., to get the all clear. And then I can't remember if I played some games in 97. I might have, but it was a quiet year. And then, of course, what put me on the world map all happened in 98. At the end of 98, I can't remember when, feels something like August, September, when India came on a trip to Zimbabwe.
2 tests, right?
I think it was a one-off test, actually. I think it was a one-off test. We played it in Harare, and something that had tended to happen throughout my career happened. And what happened was a man called Andy Pycroft came to me, and he was one of the conveners of selection. And he said to me, "If you don't go out there and take 5 wickets, we're not going to look at you again. We've given you a number of years. You've worked at your game, but there's other kids coming through. We might look at others." So they put that pressure on me, and they kept doing that throughout my career. I think they thought that was my great motivator, which I think was unfortunate. I think they would have been able to eke a little bit more out of me if they were a bit more encouraging and more believing in me rather than threatening me. But the threat worked. I went out and I took 5 wickets against India in the first innings, I think.
First innings.
So I'm trying to remember who batted first. I think we batted first and made 250 or something like that. It feels like 230, 240, 250. And then we kept India within touching distance. I think India got a lead of some kind. I can't remember. But it might have been 30 or 40 or 50 runs.
I just opened the scorecard, Henry, to make it easier. I'll read it out. Zimbabwe 221, India 280. Henry Olonga gets 5 for 70 in 26 overs. Zimbabwe make 293, and then with India chasing 235, they get bowled out for 173.
That's right. So that was obviously a momentous occasion for the country, because not only was it our second test victory, we'd beaten Pakistan previously, but it was of one of the most iconic cricket teams in the world. They had an amazing selection. They had Azharuddin, Tendulkar, there was Navjot Sidhu, Robin Singh. It was an iconic team. Ganguly,
Dravid, Azharuddin.
Of course, can't forget Dravid, the wall. And it was I think he made 100 in one of the innings, the first innings or second innings, I can't remember. But it was an amazing match because then I was named, I think I was player of the match, if I'm not mistaken, or at least I was certainly given accolades.
You were player of the match.
And so, of course, that then put me in the public sort of conversation about the future, and I proved that I could bowl at that level, because I think most people who follow cricket will tell you this, that until you get that first 5-wicket haul, or you get that first 50 or that first 100, you're never really sure whether you belong in the game. And when you do that, you go, okay. And if you do it against good players as well, it's equally reassuring. So I hadn't had that. All I had was controversy. It was a kid who couldn't bowl properly. They sent me off to 3 different places, and I still wasn't making my mark on the world. And so when I played those matches, or that match, obviously people thought, okay, he's got something. He's a match winner. He can win matches for us, so we'll have a look at him.
And that's also probably the time when you were bowling the quickest, right? That perhaps.
Yes, definitely. So 97 going into 98.
Yeah.
I started training properly, and I think it was 98 that in the early part of that year that I did this bodybuilding program called the Cybergenics bodybuilding program. It was the rage back in the day. It was a bit of a scam on the one hand, but it was, but it
got India.
but it worked. I mean, the thing is, what was scammy was some of the claims they made. They were, and they gave you these droplets which did nothing. But it was mainly the program, the actual bodybuilding program. If you adhered to it, you packed on a lot of muscle and you got strong because they made you lift heavy. And they made you lift to a point of failure, which not a lot of programs do. So it basically forced you to push your limits, which obviously is also fantastic mentally because, if you're pushing yourself beyond your known limits, it does something to your brain. And the other thing that I also did was I bought a course called The Dynamics of Personal Goal Setting. A man called Paul J. Meyer had put this course together. He was primarily a businessman, and the course is mostly directed at people in business leadership, but it works for anything and anyone. And so that was one of the main things that got me thinking positively, believing in myself, believing I could set goals, have a vision, and fulfill it. And so those 2 things came together, and obviously the culmination of that was that match. But things didn't end there for me. Actually, things got somewhat better because if I'm not mistaken, soon after that, we went to Sharjah.
Yeah.
And of course, videos still exist from way back when in 98. When I think if you start typing my name in Google, on YouTube, it'll be like Henry Olonga versus Sachin Tendulkar.
I have seen that video myself about 20 times, Henry. Yeah.
so something like that. So anyway, I obviously.
But I still haven't figured out why. He got so pissed off.
I know, mate, and it's not even as if. It's not even as if I said anything to him, or I was just happy to get him out. Because remember, I was the guy who was called to throwing, right?
Yeah.
Neil Johnson got him out twice in the test match. So if anything, he was Neil Johnson's bunny for a couple of matches. Anyway, but on that occasion, what a lot of people don't understand is, and I explain this in the book, and I tell the story often, so I know the story. But what a lot of people don't understand is that our team had a meeting. This is prior to this match that was a dead rubber. So this is prior to the final.
Yeah.
And if you look at the video on YouTube, you will notice that I don't even have my name printed on the back of my shirt. I wasn't even supposed to go on that tour. It was soon after the test match. And because I did well in the test match, I thought, oh, well, let's send Henry to Sharjah. Maybe let's see what he can do, right? So I was like a last-minute addition to the tour. And I didn't play any of the games up until that point. So I think we played Sri Lanka in 1 or 2, and then India in 1 or 2. And Sri Lanka were going home, so we had this other match with India, which didn't matter, didn't mean anything. So they picked me. And of course, one of the things so this is my point. One of the things that we discussed for some reason was that there were bowlers taking wickets off no balls. And the management team were not happy. They were just thinking it's so ill-disciplined. You should never take wickets off no balls, stay behind the line, blah, blah, blah. Now,
$1,000 fine.
$1,000 fine. But for the record, all those coaches, etc., all batsmen, right? All batsmen. There was never a fine for a stupid run out or a soft dismissal. It was just bowlers. No, you're stepping over the mark. That's unprofessional. So I got Tendulkar out, right? So I ran up, and actually what happened was I got Ganguly out very early on in my spell. It might even been my first ball. I look at it on YouTube, and it looks like the ball pitched outside leg stump. So I think it was not out. But Steve Dunn gave him out. And then that was in my first over that I bowled. Then in the second over I bowled, I got Dravid. So I bowled the back of a length ball, and it caught the outside edge. Neil Johnson caught him at slip. So India were now 2 down after 2 or 4 or so overs. And then the little master came in. In fact, now I think he would have opened, so he might have been in already, but I hadn't bowled to him yet. And then I bowled the perfect delivery to the little master. Because, Sachin, as good as he was, if you were going to get him at any point, it was early on in his innings. I think you can say that about most batsmen. But once he gets his eye in, forget it. You know what I mean? There's he was that kind of player that once he was in, he's going to get 50 or 100. So your best chance was early on. And so I actually bowled, we talked about this in our team meeting, and I actually bowled the perfect delivery. It was on a length, it swung away a little bit, or seemed, I can't remember, but it did enough that he played a false stroke. He kind of played I don't know if it was a full-blooded drive or whether it was just a defensive block, but it caught the outside edge. And just before it reached Andy Flower, Steve Dunn yelled out, "No ball." So now you can imagine, my teammates weren't happy. There were hats thrown on the ground. Maybe some stronger words than I would use on a program like this. And then it just occurred to me that I actually was going to get fined $1,000 and I was playing for free. And I thought to myself, I'm not an amateur anymore. I get paid for what I do. and you know what? It's like, I don't even know if that was legal. Like, can you actually tell someone that because you know what I mean? Like, can you tell the waiter that because he dropped the spoon, you're going to fine him some money, or because he dropped the plate of food? I mean, it's like, people make mistakes, man. You can't fine them their match fee. So anyway, forget about that. I walked back to the top of my mark, and I thought, I don't know what to do now. I've bowled to the best batsman in the world, arguably, and I got him out, and now I'm playing for free, and I'm going to get a lecture from my coach at the end of the match. So I ran in hard, and I bowled a really quick bouncer, which I'm pretty sure he wasn't expecting, because the way he played it shows that it must have surprised him a little bit. And so it caught the shoulder of the bat. It must have bounced a little bit extra as well. Caught the shoulder of the bat, and he was caught by Grant Flower.
Grant Flower.
That's silly point or something like that, yeah. And so I was just so happy that I got Tendulkar out after not getting him out, and I was happy that I was getting paid. But as you say, I'm not sure what made him so mad. I didn't give him a send-off. I didn't, exchange any words with him. I was just ecstatic. But maybe it was the manner in which he was dismissed. I mean, he was a fantastic player, and maybe he thought, that maybe he felt embarrassed. I don't know, but he took it personally. And I write in my book that I heard, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that he just kept practicing the pull shot in the mirror for a long time at night, and he kept listening to Guns N' Roses or something like that. And the next match, the final match, I think the dead rubber might have been Friday and the final might have been Sunday. I mean, I could be mistaken, but it felt like there was a day or two between. And he just went ballistic. We didn't score enough runs, incidentally. So in our first innings, we scored a paltry total. It couldn't have been more than 180 or 90 or something like that. So, which back in the day was, even back then was a low score. You'd be happy with 250 plus in 50 overs. I know T20s made the game of cricket, the shorter version of the game, extraordinary. Now people score 350 without batting an eyelid. But then, even then, back in the day, 190 was hard to defend. And he just went absolutely crazy. He was flawless. He didn't give any chances. He threw the bat very hard. I don't think I induced any kind of false stroke. I maybe got him to play and miss once or twice, but after that, he just, it was business time for him, and he was man of the match. Scored 100 off 50, 60 balls, something like that, and it was phenomenal. I, of course, wasn't the only one who came in for a bit of stick. I mean, everyone who bowled got but in particular, because there was this perception that I'd injured his ego or something like that. He got his revenge, and of course, it's all over YouTube. So, but it was the birth of me, because I was strong and I was bowling really fast. And so I took that form with me into the Pakistan tour at the end of 98. And we won our first test series in Pakistan on the back of us bowling as a team, of course, but on the back of one spell that I bowled in Pakistan's second innings. Let me just tell the story briefly. So we went to Pakistan after Australia had been there. And I'm not sure where this match was. I think it was Peshawar. I think it was
Mark Taylor scored declared at 334.
That's right. That's exactly the one. So we came soon after that. Yeah. So soon, in fact, that the wicket that he scored those runs on was still playable. You could still play on. and there was a man who was pretty high up in Pakistan cricket, who the day before the test match came up to the wicket, had a look at it, and said, "We're not going to play on that wicket. We're going to play on this one." And what he meant was the wicket adjacent to the Mark Taylor wicket. And the wicket that he wanted was underprepared. They hadn't been, they'd rolled it a little bit and watered it a bit, but it was still full of grass. It had like an inch of grass on it. So he was basically saying he wanted a green top and he wanted a result. And he assumed the result would go Pakistan's way because, of course, they had Wasim Akram. They had Waqar Yunus. I think they had Aqib Javed as well. And that was an incredible pace attack that on their day, even on a flat wicket, there'd be a handful. And so cutting a long story short, I think they batted first. Again, scores were in the 200s, 250.
I got it. 296 Pakistan's first innings.
Yeah.
238 Zimbabwe's first innings. Neil Johnson getting 100. And that's 103, right. Pakistan bowled out for 103 in the second innings with Henry Olonga getting 4 for 42 in 11 overs.
So that right there was what won us the match. Yeah. So that performance pulled the heart out of their attack. So, I can't remember who I got, but I remember getting Inzamam ul Haq with a ball that stayed low. Yeah. And so the wicket was becoming unpredictable. It was bouncing off a length. It was staying low off a length. It was dangerous. It really was an underprepared wicket. And it was taking chunks of grass out with it as well. People getting hit on the gloves and fingers almost getting broken, that kind of danger. But they wanted to keep playing because they thought they had a chance. They only were chasing 160 odd. We were chasing 160 odd and they were getting wickets regularly. So they thought they had a chance, but Murray Goodwin knuckled down and I think he scored a half century. And we ended up winning that match. And then what happened next was the next test match was a draw as a result of a lot of time being lost due to fog. So we were starting quite late in the day. And in the last match, I don't even think we bowled a ball. I can't remember. I think it was just...
Fogged out. Yeah.
It was fogged out. It was abandoned. And so as a result of that, we won the test series. We didn't really deserve to, if you look at it that way, because we won one test match out of 3. But, it's enough. And if people look at the record books, they'll see that Zimbabwe won its first away series in Pakistan. And that's all they care about. And I was named...
And you were the man of the series.
For Zimbabwe. But Yusuf Yohana, who ended up being called Muhammad Yusuf, if I'm not mistaken, he was the Pakistan man of the series because he kept scoring runs at a good rate in spite of everything, the wicket, etc. So that was the making of me, and that was almost my peak. I think I bowled quicker in Pakistan than I ever bowled at any other stage in my career. Then injuries and form became an issue. And then soon after that was the World Cup, and we did exceptionally well. And again, I had a good match against India, which many Indians keep reminding me about.
We remember that well. But when I was reading the book, I really enjoyed that phase, that passage that you had about saying that you had worked on your Yorker really well towards the death, and which perhaps the Indians were not expecting.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what they knew about me. I was still quite fresh. I was still, although I'd been on the cricket scene for almost 4 years by then, I hadn't played a lot of cricket. So it's not like they had a lot of intel on me and they knew what I could do. But our coach, Dave Houghton, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Dave Houghton, yes, he'd spoken to us about reverse swing and bowling at the death, and we'd obviously encountered a few bowlers by this stage like Darren Gough, of course, Wasim, Waqar, Aqib Javed. All these guys were good exponents of reverse swing. And so over the years, we'd practiced, we'd tried, but England in particular was an interesting series, at least the World Cup was, because we were using these balls called reader balls. And the reader balls have a prominent seam, and they're slightly different to the Duke balls or the Kookaburras in that, and because England was, obviously they have lush outfields and there was a lot of rain around as well. It was very hard to get the ball scuffed up, but if you got it just enough, because 50 overs is long enough for one side to get a little scuffed up. If you just do enough work on it, it can reverse swing. So we'd practiced this enough. And I was bowling initially to Robin Singh. I think Robin Singh was the one who let the team down. And just to give a little bit of background to people who didn't watch the match, India were chasing a modest total of, again, 240 or something like that, 230, because those were decent scores back in the day. You have the scorecard there, I'm sure. But it wasn't a massive score. Sachin Tendulkar had returned to India because sadly his father had died and he went to pay his respects. So that was an important thing to mention because, of course, they were somewhat weaker. And in my first
They were chasing, just to clarify, they were chasing 253, but Zimbabwe had batted 50 overs and India were only going to get 46.
Correct, because of slow over rate, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So thanks for clarifying that. The figures in my head are always around the 230, 240 mark. Anyway, so what happened was it was neck and neck for quite a while. And India got to about 240 with maybe 6 or so overs to go. And
246, with 6 overs to go. Yeah,
3 wickets in hand, something like that. There was, and Campbell came to me when there were maybe 2 overs left, and he said to me, "Listen, this is this is your chance to shine. And one of my other teammates said, you can make history here. And all I had to do was believe that I could do enough. So I came round the wicket to Robin Singh. So Robin Singh was still there, of course. Kumble was still in. So 3 wickets, and I'm thinking, oh, man, I have to come up with a miracle here. But, of course, I was thinking, the last time I played India, they made me look stupid, So I thought maybe this is my moment to get something back on them. And then, of course, like I said, Robin Singh is the one who started the rot, because I don't think he should have gotten out. It wasn't the greatest delivery. I came around the wicket to him. It was reverse swinging a little bit. And he could have just taken a single. But he kind of got caught between hitting it over the top and driving it on the ground. And he lobbed it in the air to Alistair Campbell, who was at short cover. And he took a good catch. It was a decent catch just in front of him. He had to dive a little bit, that was a miracle in itself. And Alistair Campbell never dived, even if he was about to be run out. So it was quite amazing that he took that catch. And then, of course, I'm now back to over the wicket. And this was where all that muscle memory came in. We talk about muscle memory in sport, how if you do something 10,000 times, eventually you don't even have to think about it. Well, on this occasion, it all just came together. Javed Srinath, I bowled the perfect Yorker, which beat his defenses quite well. He'd actually come in and hit a couple of decent shots. I think he hit Guy Whittle for a 4 or maybe even a 6. So he was looking like he was getting his eye in. And with 2 overs to go and them needing crumbs, I don't know, 8 runs or something, I obviously had to come up with it. And so when I got him out, all of a sudden now we had Venkatesh Prasad walking out very slowly. And I'd been with Venkatesh Prasad at the MRF Pace Foundation. And I remember bowling to him then, and I don't remember him being a dashing Mark Waugh or Greg Blewett or Ricky Ponting. No disrespect to Mr. Prasad.
No, I don't think even Mr. Prasad will have a quiet chuckle that you mentioned names like Mark Waugh right here.
So listen, and Venkatesh Prasad was a lovely guy as well. I've come across very few horrible people in cricket, but I have done, but he wasn't one of them. He was a lovely man. But I thought, I think I can get him. He's tall. Remember, he's very tall. And if there's anything we know about tall people is they struggle to come down on the ball very quickly. So I tried to do an action replay of the previous ball, but I didn't quite get the length right. But the line was good. And so it hit him halfway up the pad, maybe on the knee roll. And because they only needed something like 4 runs or something like that, my first instinct was to get the ball to prevent them running a quick single, because I knew that they wanted to swap. But then as I ran towards the ball, and just before I picked it up, I actually stopped and thought that looked pretty adjacent. So I turned around and appealed, and Steve Dunn gave him out. And of course, it was pandemonium, at least from the Zimbabwean. At least from the Zimbabwean fans. The Indian fans were stunned into silence. They had been, and I write about this humorously in my book, they'd been abusing me all day long. They were saying, bring back Olonga and the game will go on no longer, So it was one of those moments that was very satisfying, because I think I got 3 wickets in 4 balls. I wasn't named man of the match. I think Grant Flower was.
Yes.
For taking a number of wickets and scoring maybe a half century. I can't remember.
45.
Almost, yeah. But it was equally satisfying. I felt like the man of the match, even if I wasn't named, because of course, that's what I was in the team for, was to win matches. And I was a match winner on that occasion.
Interestingly, you bowled just 4 overs in that match.
Yeah, my first 3 overs. I know. My first 3 overs went for, I don't know, 20, 23 or something like that. So they took me off. But we had a decent pace attack. So the reason they could do that was because we had, in that match, we actually, if I'm not mistaken, we added Ed O'Branders. So
he was there.
We had Heath Streak, Ed O'Branders, myself, Neil Johnson. And Guy Whittle. Yeah. And so you had a couple of all-rounders. They could give 3 or 4 overs here. one of the things we wanted to do was to keep changing the bowling attack, just so that they didn't get settled against any one of us. So that explains why I bowled only a few overs. But my first spell wasn't that great, so that's why they took me off. But we then went on to qualify for the Super 6 stages after beating South Africa in an amazing match. I won't go into too much detail. But and then we got eliminated after losing to Pakistan at Lord's, and that eventually ended our campaign. And then we started rebuilding from then on. We had some good
just to stop you there, but I didn't realize until I read this book that Zimbabwe were actually like the South Africa of World Cups for a point, because there were moments where you just needed a few more runs and you would have qualified ahead of New Zealand. But the math went wrong, and then you didn't qualify. And that happened twice.
Well, it's worse than that. It's worse than that, because not only did we get the math wrong, but we were threatened. So let me put it. So I was batting with Heath Streak at Lords. Not at Lords. Did I say Lords earlier? What I meant was the Oval.
Against Pakistan, right?
We played Pakistan at the Oval. Yes, it wasn't Lords. It was the Oval. So we were playing at the Oval. We were always going to lose that match. I think we were chasing some high score, whatever, 280 or something. It was out of our reach. And we'd lost a lot of wickets, and we weren't doing great. So I was in batting with Heath Streak. Now, you know that if I'm in, that we're almost all out, right? If I go in to bat, it's almost curtains for Zimbabwe. But we still had 10 or so overs left. And Heath Streak and I were talking as we were going, and our primary objective was survival. We thought, let's just survive for another 2-3 overs, or take it an over at a time, and perhaps we can have a go at the end. Because Heath was pretty good at that. Now, it was going to be difficult, because we're talking Waka, Shoaib Akhtar, and Wazim.
And Saklen.
And Saklen, yes. Now I'm going to get to Saklen. So we had someone bring drinks with gloves. You know, when they bring drinks, and you didn't ask for the drink, but they've obviously got an instruction from the coach. So the coach said, "You guys need to start hitting out." And we were thinking, well, we've still got 10 overs, man. We can hit out and get out, and we'll be all out for nothing, right? Let's just try and hang around. And Streak and I were like, no, just ignore that. Let's just try and hang around, survive, and see what happens. Not long after that, the instruction came again. But this time, it came with a threat. And the message was, if you guys don't start hitting out now, you will not be picked for the next match against New Zealand or whatever, in the Super Sixes. The assumption was that we'd already made the Super Sixes, and so they were going to leave us out if we didn't start getting aggressive. So what's a guy to do, right? I mean, your coach has threatened you that they're not going to pick you again. So I had a swing at Saklen, because if you're going to swing at anyone in that Pakistan team, he's probably the best one to try it against, right? So I swung, and I missed the ball. I was out of my crease. I got stumped. The next batsman was Adam Huckle, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Adam Huckle came in, and he was out first ball. And then Pommy Mbangwa came in next, and he was out first ball. So the match was over. Saklen got a hat trick, and we still had 9 or 10 overs left.
9.5 overs.
Yeah. This is what I'm saying. We had 9 or call it 10 overs, right? We had 10 overs to go, and I wrote in my book that Heath Streak walked into the change room. He was absolutely livid, because, of course, he saw this all happen on the other side. Yeah. He threw his bat down, and it didn't occur to us straight away what we'd done until the commentators started doing the debrief, as they do after the match. And one of them said, and I think this was blaring, this is either in the change room at the ground, or it might have been later when we were in our hotel rooms. And we heard the commentator say, what a pity, Zimbabwe, if they'd only scored another 30 or so runs, they would have had a superior. They would have had a superior net run rate to New Zealand, and they would have qualified in place of New Zealand. And so New Zealand, actually, in the Super Six stage, we had a draw with New Zealand because there was a rain-affected match. So that's why we ended up pretty close on points. We shared points for that match, and I think, I can't remember what else happened. But long story short, they qualified instead of us because of 30 runs. And, you think about it on reflection, you think 10 more overs, Heath Streak was a decent all-rounder. I'm sure we would have scored another 30 runs because the other batsmen would have just held up an end, just try to survive. And Streaky would have, hit out and scored some boundaries perhaps, and maybe we would have got there. And I'm very honest about this in the book, that I can't say I know we would have got those 30 runs, but it's a question of what if. A bit like South Africa in the 2003 World Cup, when they got the math wrong. You're always left saying, what if, if only we had ifs, buts, and maybes. And it's in that camp. But it was to happen again in South Africa, in a tri-nation series or tri-series, however you put it, when we played England and South Africa. And something similar happened at Port Elizabeth, at St. George's Park, when I was the last man out. I was the last man to go out and bat. And I asked my coach, listen, I'd been there before, right? So I said, is there anything to think about? Should we bat? Should I hang around? He's like, nah, don't worry, just have a go, right? So of course I go out, I have a go, I get out, and you won't believe it. And I write about it I talk about it in my audiobook. I asked the question, can lightning strike the same place twice? Well, it did on that occasion. It did, because the commentators, same as before, came up and said, oh, poor old Zimbabwe, if only they'd scored another X number of runs, they would have been through to the final. And, again, I write about how unfair I think the whole system in Zimbabwe was, because the coach didn't get sanctioned for that. I was always sanctioned for bad bowling here or bad bowling there. But he literally cost us a potential place in a semi-final in the World Cup. And nothing happened.
And God knows how many chances Zimbabwe are going to get for that.
I know. Yeah. And anyway, I'm not angry or mad at the coach. One of the things that I think will come through a bit stronger in my audiobook, and I need to say this, the audiobook is actually going to be called Blood, Sweat and Treason, My Story Expanded. Okay. Because what I've done is I've taken a lot of those stories and I've fleshed them out a little bit more. So if you read the book and you compare it to the audiobook is probably twice as long, because I've then taken some of those stories and given a little bit more of the human aspect to the story, perhaps, or a little bit more detail, or I've thrown in a few jokes or something like that. So the audiobook's longer. But I'm very honest about how I think there was a double standard in Zimbabwe cricket, where they would be very harsh on some people and go easy on others. It wasn't always results based. So there was obviously something else at play sometimes.
Absolutely. And that you've mentioned that in several aspects of the book, and it comes across, with all honesty, it doesn't come across as vindictive, but it just comes across as an honest opinion that you're putting through. Which brings me to, the moment that you talk about in the West Indies, when Dave Horton's tenure as coach finished, because the players felt that, this was just untenable from this point of time. And also in parallel was the economic and political situation in Zimbabwe, which was then really reaching like a stage that, that was very apparent that things were going horribly wrong. So, those two things seem to have come together to sort of at the really wrong time, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I must just give a little bit more foundation on the West Indies. We'd almost won. We almost won the first test against the West Indies in Port of Spain. So Brian Lara had taken an indefinite break from cricket because I think he'd gone to New Zealand and as captain, and I don't think they got the results they wanted, and everyone is jumping down his throat. So he said, you know what, I'm just going to take a break. So Jimmy Adams was the stand-in captain, and we played that test match around about the time a thing called Carnival happens. And Carnival is, I think many people might be familiar with Carnival in Brazil. Anyway, it was a rainy affair. There was a lot of moisture around. So we actually decided to field first in that test match. And we fielded first and restricted West Indies to a low score. It was in the hundreds. I don't think they got like 200 or something. I think we did in our first innings. And we had a healthy lead. And then we bowled them out for another pretty low score. And we needed 99 to win. And without making the story very long and boring, we ended up failing to get the 99. And I think we were bowled out in the 60s, 66 or something. Something like that, yeah. So 63. It was very, very heartbreaking for Zimbabwe because not many teams went to the West Indies and won. Not many teams went to the West Indies and won when they had Courtney Walsh and Curtly Ambrose bowling. And there was another young man called Franklin Rose.
Who we are very familiar with, Henry. Our podcast called 81 All Out is named after India being 81 All Out in a test against West Indies in 1997, where Franklin Rose, the same
is that
man...
Right?
Yes, it is.
Was that 81? I see. So was that 81? Was that in the West Indies? It must have been the West Indies.
Barbados, where India were chasing 120 and got out 81.
Oh, I see. So they used to do this regularly, you see. We didn't know that. And they also bowled England out for some ridiculous score.
47 or something.
40-something. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we thought, no, we woke up in the morning thinking, oh, we're going to get this 99 runs. That's a walk in the park. We've got all day, et cetera, et cetera. But, fifth day wicket, the cracks had widened. It was staying up, staying down, blah, blah. It was the worst. And it was a procession, in, out, in, out. And long story short, you've got to throw that into the equation with regards to the politics of Zimbabwe. The first farmer that I heard of getting killed happened around about that time as well. He was a man called Martin Olds, and he was an old boy of my school, the first white farmer getting murdered. And then the history with Dave Houghton and the near misses, you put that all together, and some of the senior players were saying, you know what, I think we need a change. And Dave had been in charge after John Hampshire had left us. And I think John Hampshire coached us when I made my debut, 95, but I think he was gone by 96. So I think 96, Dave Houghton was in charge already. And so we're looking at 4 or 5 years. And I don't know what the shelf life of a coach at the highest level is, but I think if you look around, people get sick of you after around about that time. You know what I mean? Like it happened to Andy Flower. He had success with England, and then round about the 5-6 year mark, Justin Langer, and it almost doesn't matter how successful you are. You might have won multiple World Cups and trophies, but there's just a certain irritation that starts to creep in. Maybe the saying "familiarity breeds contempt" is informative. I don't know, but I just think, over time, people just say, you know what, I think we need some fresh faces here. And it obviously happens to players. After a while, people think, oh, you haven't performed in a while, see you later. But one of the things I didn't mention in my original paperback or hardback copy of the book, well, and I might touch on it here in this book, and I have to be sensitive about this, but the coach actually manhandled me at a practice. I don't know what we were doing. We were doing a warm-up exercise. I think we were fielding. And I don't know what I did that was offensive. It's possible I did something. I don't know. But I was just being myself, lots of energy. I was a bit jocular or something. and he was obviously stressed and somewhat tense. He started yelling at us, and he grabbed me by the shirt and he almost pulled me off my feet. And of course, when something like that happens, it kind of it sends a bit of a wave of negativity through the team. And that was another thing that I think was informative in the decision that was to come towards the end of the tour. I don't know who kicked it off, but there was a meeting that was convened, and Andrew Flower was our captain at the time. And he said that he'd been approached by a few senior players who said that they felt the tenure with Dave Houghton had run its course. It was untenable. And so there was a show of hands. Who here is for, who's against? I can't remember if there were any people who said they wanted Dave Houghton to continue, but I can tell you that there were a lot of hands that were showed to say that they wanted to vote no confidence in him. Andy Flower was very clear that he thought it was a very serious thing. My impression, I can't remember the conversation, we're talking 20-something years ago, but my impression was that he thought we needed to be absolutely clear that it was what we wanted to do. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't a fan of the decision, but he was going to go with what the team decided. Now, of course, you talk to me, you hear one thing. You might talk to the rest of the team and they might say something else. But I think I've got a pretty good grasp on that, is the fact that the majority of people said, nah, we can't carry on. And there were a lot of things discussed. Of course, there were the near misses. There was the manhandling of me. And a lot of people also felt that he'd become a little distant. So Dave, a lovely man. I played with him. He coached me. I'm not against him in any way. But one of the things he did was when play began, he'd do a crossword. And he seemed disinterested in what was happening. You know, he wasn't watching the computer screen or the monitor. He'd watch. Of course he'd watch. I mean, cricket's got a lot of downtime, right? But it just wasn't a good look. And so people were feeling that was also, he seemed disinterested or jaded or something. And when you've had close near misses with someone, and so remember there's the World Cup, there was the South Africa Tri-Series, and there was now that first test. We all felt we got to get rid of him. So we voted, and the manager was informed, and he went and he told Dave Houghton. And I can't remember if Dave announced it straight away or did it when we went back home, but he obviously signed his resignation, and he was no longer the coach of Zimbabwe until fairly recently. I think he's been brought back into it. Look, I think it must have been a very, very traumatic experience for him. I can't imagine it was a pleasant time for him. But, you know, that's cricket. I had those moments. I had many moments when I was sent home from a tour because they thought I wasn't performing, or I was given a lecture. And you know what? You take it on the chin, man. You know, you're a professional sportsman. You've got to be able to handle it. And, you know, in all honesty, as much as I like Dave as a person, I just think that some of the grievances brought against him were valid. And so we ended up going, but you'd think the troubles would stop there. The troubles didn't stop there. We then went to England, and then the players decided to strike for more money.
Exactly. And that's when the player power kind of became really prominent. But on the tour of England, though, I have to ask you to, I have to mention that particular incident that you mentioned in the book, which seems to have been pivotal in terms of your relationship with the players, especially causing quite a bit of a sort of a racial cleave in the team because of that incident with Mululeke and Kala that happened, when a white player basically at the heat of a moment had a statement about him which you disagreed with strongly and sort of seems to have blown up.
Yeah, so I think by this point, I reckon I might have been on the verge of injury, or I was injured. I can't remember. I started to get some pain in my lower leg.
Oh, yes. When you had a scan and nothing was revealed.
Yeah,
Correct.
It didn't show anything.
Yeah.
So the scan didn't show anything. And far from getting any sympathy from my teammates, they were like, well, what's wrong with you? The scans have shown nothing, right?
Correct.
So, so we didn't get off on a good footing, obviously. So I was obviously hurt that they disbelieved that I was actually injured, because every time I landed on my leg, this sharp pain would go through my leg. I'd never experienced it before. I was seeing the physio, we were trying to treat it, and nothing was happening. It was getting worse every time I bowled. So I'll jump ahead and tell you that what it was a stress fracture in my fibula, but we didn't know that at the time. It actually only came out when it happened a second time after the tour of New Zealand, maybe a year or two later. And the only reason we discovered it is because when I came back from that tour and told my dad my leg still hurts, he sent me for an X-ray because my dad was a doctor. And then they found this huge bump. Well, I say huge, but it was a bump on my fibula where the bone had repaired itself. And that's how you know that you have a stress fracture. Unless you do some very specific scans, when you first start to injure a stress fracture, it doesn't show on an X-ray. So anyway, so that's the foundation. I'm obviously injured. I'm sitting in the change room. I'm not happy with life. And the farm invasions are happening in Zimbabwe. So obviously, one of the worst things you can bring up is politics at a time like that. Like there's some things you don't talk about. People say if you're in polite company, you don't talk about religion and you don't talk about politics, right? But of course, we're in a change room and, we're playing against Yorkshire. Pommy Mbang was taking 10 wickets in the 2 innings. But there's a lot of rain. So there's lots of downtime. So Neil Johnson was a fierce competitor on the field. He was a lovely guy, but he came from South Africa. And I think that's significant because I think in South Africa, there's a little less sensitivity talking about race because of the checkered history of South Africa and apartheid, etc. And so he might have been a bit more prudent to not say what he said. And he might not have thought it was offensive. But he said it anyway. And I think he expected it to be something that was just laughed about and joked and everyone moves on. Now, I can't remember exactly what he said, so I'm not quoting his exact words, but it went something like this. Nkala, you're the blackest thing I've ever seen. You're dark like charcoal. So other people will tell me he said something else, but either way, whatever he said to me was inappropriate. I thought it's not the kind of thing that you should be saying to a teammate who's a different race to you. He didn't say it, in my opinion, with a tone that everyone knew was a joke. So I said, hold on, some of us find that a little offensive, something like that, right? I said, I find that offensive. And so I can't remember whether he jumped back in or someone else did, but then someone else said, you got a chip on your shoulder. I said, pardon? I beg your pardon. What do you mean I got a chip on my shoulder? I think what he said is wrong. So, of course, it all hit off then. Because now, listen, I'm a fast bowler. I'm generally a very placid guy. But, of course, I've got an aggressive side to me. You have to be a fast bowler. You can't be a weakling. You've got to be able to stand up for yourself, right? So I said, okay, right. Are you guys serious? You're doing this right now? So the interesting thing is, in that squad, if I'm not mistaken, there would have been 4 players of color and the rest were white. So there was myself, there was Pommy Mbangwa, there was Nkala, and there was Tatenda Taibu. He was a very young boy at the time. I think he may still have been at school. He might have been like 17 or 18.
Like 7
on the tour.
He must have been so young.
He was so small. I know. But so they were just bringing him on the tour to get experience of what it was like for touring. They had already identified that he was a promising player of the future, et cetera, et cetera. Andy Flower was on the verge of retirement within a couple of years. So it was a plan for the future. So he wasn't going to say anything, was he? Pommy Mbangwa, he was chilled. He didn't think much of the comment. And Nkala wasn't going to say anything because he was a junior player. He would have been, I don't know, I'm guessing barely 20. So I thought, well, I'm the senior black player. I'm going to say something. I don't think this is appropriate or okay. So they all jumped down my throat. So I said to them, I said, I don't agree with these farm invasions, but one good thing that's going to come out of them is going to knock you white guys off your high horse because you guys, you keep looking down at us. Yeah. Oh, they didn't like that. They did not like that. They gave me a look that said, oh, I wish you would just die right now. And I said to them, so I challenged some of them. So they all kept coming at me, like all of them, like the whole freaking change room came after me. I'm not saying every single person said something, but...
And many of them had farms too, Henry, right? To be fair.
Yes, of course.
They had farms.
So I said to them, I said to them, I bet you don't treat your farm workers equal. Yeah? I said, I bet you don't look at me as an equal. And here's the thing, is I was pointing out something that if they were up for a vociferous debate, they would have understood what I was saying, which was, surely it's okay for me to call out Neil Johnson for that statement. Because if we are peers, if we're on the same level, if we're teammates, we should be able to have it out amongst ourselves. And even if it gets heated, we should still be cool with each other, right? I mean, that's life, right? It happens across the aisle. When you talk about the political spectrum, there's left, there's right. People yell at each other, they shout, but you can have a beer with each other afterwards. But of course, it was a very tense time in Zimbabwe, so emotions were heightened. And long story short, there's one guy, Gary Brent, who came to me and we sort of had a decent, he sort of saw my point of view. The rest of them were not interested. One of the senior players went to the manager and said, Olonga's causing some racial stuff. I'm like, wait, dude, I didn't start this, man. I was like, what? How did this end up on my shoulders? Yeah. I'm like, a white dude says something inappropriate to a junior black player. That's okay to you guys, but I'm the one who started it. So long story short, not only do I pinpoint that as pivotal in my career, but it was pivotal in Zimbabwe cricket. Because I then go on to talk about how there were eyeballs now watching this racial issue in Zimbabwe cricket. Couple or so years later, in fact, no. So when was that tour? What year was that tour?
2000.
Was that 2000?
Yeah.
So a year or so later, things started to move. By 2002, things had well and truly moved. So what happened next was there was a group called what was it called?
Oh, to remove racial discrimination.
Yeah.
I remember that.
They gave themselves a name. It was the Campaign for the Eradication of Racism in Zimbabwe Cricket, something like that.
Campaign to Eradicate Racism in Zimbabwean Cricket. Yeah.
Yeah. It was spearheaded by a man called Osius Vute and another man called Maksud Ibrahim. Now, I knew both of these men because I bumped into Osius because he was Everton's friend or relative, something like that. Everton Matamanadzu.
Yeah.
Max, I knew because I rubbed shoulders with him in club cricket. He was an Asian man. He was the son of Justice Ahmed Ibrahim. And he was a good man. He was a chief justice. He was a judge in Zimbabwe. And he was very instrumental in getting me to go to the academies over the years. He was a great believer in me. So I'm a big fan of the man. But Max, his son, was a little bit more aggressive in that he wanted the integration of other races in the team. So he wanted more Asian players. He had some players in his club. I think there was a guy called Hitesh Hera. I could be saying that wrong, but he was a good bowler, but he never got looked at for national selection. And Max thought he was good enough, and there were obviously barriers. There was a ceiling, and this needed to be challenged. Aussies, because Everton had already played some matches and then wasn't looked at again in seriousness, he had a problem with that. So if I'm not mistaken, Everton on that tour of Pakistan in 96, I didn't mention it, but I mention it now. So we did a tour of Pakistan 96, and that's when he and Homi Bangwa made their test debuts, or at least their debuts. Maybe Homi was test and Everton was one days. And I think he took 4 wickets, Everton, in one of the one days. I think we lost. But, if you take 4 wickets in Pakistan on those flat, low, slow tracks, you're pretty promising. And I don't think he played too many matches after that. I mean, he did play here and there. But, of course, Aussies, I don't know what his background was. I think he was a finance guy. But Aussies wasn't happy that his friend or his relative wasn't getting picked. So he got together with Max, and they formed this coalition. Did I say campaign? It might have been called the coalition. A coalition to eradicate, or it could have been the campaign. Who cares? It's something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that started the ball rolling, where then they had this independent group that came to do a survey of Zimbabwe cricket. And it's obviously in the book, but I can't remember the dates. It could have been 2001, so maybe a year after all of that had happened. I'd gone on a tour of India, done badly there, gone to New Zealand, done badly, they got sent home. And it's also the story I tell of how Trevor Madonda could have scored a century in Wellington, and they declared the innings.
Yeah.
And that was
black
another
Zimbabwe batsman could have scored the 100.
He would have.
Yeah.
He would have, but he didn't. He was stranded on 77 or something, with us trying to push for victory, and New Zealand weren't interested from the moment they started batting. There was never going to be a result. And some of us thought, oh, crumbs, if that was a white player, they would have let him get his 100, And of course, years later, Hamilton Masakadze became that person. But Trevor Madonda was to die within a few months of that happening. And I also mentioned how at his funeral, one of the white players turned around to a group of us black players and said, well, it's not like anyone liked him anyway. And we were stunned. I was stunned. And so, cut a long story short, so when we did this survey, it started to reveal how people really felt in their heart of hearts, because it was anonymous. So people could say what they thought. Now, normally, like in the West, people have a filter. But this is what I'm trying to say. Some of my teammates didn't have that filter. Otherwise, Neil Johnson wouldn't have said what he said.
Yeah.
But now that the filter wasn't an issue with an anonymous survey, they asked some very specific questions, like, and it was multiple choice. Do you think racism is a big problem in Zimbabwe? Yes. A is yes. B is moderately a problem. C might be not a problem at all, and C is D might be like you're deluded. Of course, it's not racist. Something like that. I'm making this up, but you get the gist. It was a scale. And people could answer multiple choice. And then there was also a section where you could write what you wanted. And that's when it all came out, man. People would say, black people can't bat. They can bowl. They'll be bowlers. They'll be bowlers, but they'll never be batsmen.
Isaac Vivian Alexander Richards agrees, of course.
Gordon Greenwich. There's just a number of them. Anyway, so, and then they were saying things like, one of the hardest things they said, and sadly, it may actually be true. And you obviously I have to be careful how I say this, but this one person said, you can't let black people run anything in Africa. They'll destroy it. They said they destroyed our tennis, they destroyed our hockey, they've destroyed our rugby, and now they want to destroy our cricket. And some of us were going, wow. Now, I say it's really sad because in one sense, those words have almost become prophetic. and
Yeah.
cricket has sort of, sadly, cricket has been destroyed by a lot of black administrators, which it really annoys me because.
But that's because of the fact that they're bad administrators and not because of the fact that they're black.
I know. I know. But you won't win that argument against white Zimbabweans. No, you won't. They're going to say, "Nah, you see, we told you, we told you." And so either way, what it exposed is that underneath the politeness was this racist undertone from the white side, and that there were definitely issues. There were issues with. So, for example, there were issues with selection. There wasn't equitable selection. Now, I'm not even trying to suggest that there was a batsman who would replace Andy Flower or a bowler who would replace Heath Street. But what I mean is, when, like in my case, if I played 3 great matches and 1 bad one, I'd be dropped soon after the bad one. Or in the case of Everton Matambadadzo, he played a good match, then an okay match, and then you never see him again. And it seemed to be, and I write about this, that it was more who you knew than how good you were or what the results were. There were some players who never won a match for Zimbabwe, but they'd be in there every single time, just like consistently picked, never getting lectures, always scoring 20s, 30s, maybe a 50 here and there, and it was enough. And with someone like me, it's like, take 5 wickets or you're gone. Take 5 wickets or you're gone. So there seemed to be an unequal playing field. If you looked at it critically, you had to look really hard. If you ask me, I don't think there was this massive racial problem in Zimbabwe cricket to the level of that was put out there. I think that it was always going to take a bit of it was going to take a while for black players to start coming through, and eventually it was going to happen. But what this survey did was it short-circuited that problem and it accelerated everything. So what then happened is they said, we've got to have X number of white selectors, X number of black selectors, X number of white administrators, X number of black administrators. And
like
so
a quota. Yeah.
Exactly. They didn't want to call it a quota, they called it a target.
Okay.
And then long story short, Peter Chingoka, who was one of our, he was like the president for a long time, but he wanted a role in Zimbabwe cricket because being president was a non-paying role. You're just a figurehead. And then he joined the management. I can't remember as what, maybe as a manager or something. And then he got paid. So did Osius Vute. Osius Vute became the CEO, I think. And
Peter Chingoka, we must mention here, was very close to Robert Mugabe, right?
Well, I believe so. I can't speak as an authority. And by the way, he's another one of those people who's died.
Okay.
But Peter certainly had, him and his brother, he had a brother called Paul. Paul was the chief administrator of tennis. And he's dead as well. And Peter was the chief administrator in cricket. And when I say administrator, of course, I mean a non-paid role in the case until he became manager or whatever he was. Managing director, maybe. I could have his role wrong, but in any case, the quotas came or targets, as they called them. And then the pendulum swung the other way. Yeah. Because then we had a black selector called Peter Mangongo. And I talk about how I saw the other side of the racial divide, right? So here I was playing in mainly white clubs, and they were very good to me. They took me to games when I was a little boy, etc. And then as an adult, some of them turned against me because they thought I was the guy who instigated everything in England, and they hated me for it. And then Peter Mangongo invited me to play for a club called Takashinga, which was an all-black side. And I'm not sure I had a choice in the matter. I could have said no, but then he was a national selector. So yeah, he came to me one day and he said, as the first black player, I'd like you to mentor some of our up-and-coming black kids, which to me was fantastic. Like, who wouldn't want to do that, right? That would be equivalent to someone going to, say, Virat Kohli and saying, hey, we've got this amazing orphanage. with some young Indian players who are showing promise. Can you just come and do a bit of coaching once in a while? It's great for the papers. It's great for the journalists. It's great for the pictures. It's great for everything. Everyone gets to win, right? So the first black player goes to this black club. It was founded by Bill Flower and Andy Flower. It was in the high density townships. So long story short, it was a bit of a commute for me, but it's a good work. There's everything good about it, right? Everyone would turn around and go, tick, tick, tick. We've ticked every box there, except these guys were just as racist as some of the guys that I was dealing with over here on this side. And so they were, one of the guys was a guy called Amos. He would come to practice wearing a ZANU-PF t-shirt. Wow. ZANU-PF is the major ruling party in Zimbabwe. And like, they've murdered people, raped people, and no one says anything. It's like, it's okay for Amos to come with a ZANU-PF t-shirt. And then I played in a match against some of my contemporaries. I think we played Old Hararians. It was a home match, meaning it was played at Takashinga. Oh no, hold on. It was at Old Hararians. Anyway, this is 20-something years ago. But anyway, the guys started yelling cuss words. They were calling them derogatory names. They were yelling. No disrespect, but I'd come from a middle-class background where I had played with an understanding that cricket is for gentlemen. You know what I mean? You play with a certain amount of grace, and you play to be a sportsman who plays fair, you play hard, you respect your opponents, you respect the umpires, blah, 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 blah. That was always a part of my blood. And I hope I always played like that and came across that way. But I was never the kind of guy who would threaten to kill someone, yell at them, blah, blah, blah. I didn't sledge. I'm not saying ever, but it wasn't a thing I did. And now here I was with people threatening war against their white counterparts. It was disgusting to me. It was terrible. So, and now the other thing I need to mention is, in Zimbabwe, I never really fit in the country for a number of reasons. One, I was foreign born, so I was born in Zambia. Two, I didn't speak the vernacular languages in Zimbabwe. They speak Shona and Ndebele, two major languages of the big tribes there. And of course, I'm a black man, so I would never really fit with the white people. But the black people never accepted me as Zimbabwean either. In fact, that's something that even happens to this day. I bump into people, sometimes even VIPs, who say, I'm not Zimbabwean. Oh, you were born in Kenya, or they get that wrong. But so long story short, I found myself as a nomad traveling between two groups of people who both rejected me. Like the black people looking at me going, and so I would try and call them out on their behavior. Then they'd have a go at me as well. And so in the end, and of course, in the end, after I did the black armband protest, which happened at the World Cup of 2003, the first people to turn against me was my club, Takashinga. They
expelled you, right?
They expelled me. They're the first people to turn their backs on me. And so it's interesting that I've got this view that no one else has in Zimbabwe of both sides of the equation.
I wanted to ask you about the trajectory here, because in 2000 incident happens against Yorkshire, the whole Nkala incident. And then after that, you write quite, a lot about how you were quite ostracized in the team and how people were not willing to talk to you. People would give you the cold shoulder. You were never made to feel part of the team. And yet, 3 years later, of course, you've spoken about this, seeing the other side of the racial divide, but yet 3 years later, here you are standing with a white man in solidarity saying that people need to stand up. That is a remarkable sort of trajectory for me to imagine that what you went through.
It's quite eye-opening when you realize that human beings can be just as shallow on whatever their skin color is. When you realize that a lot of human beings don't have depth to them, you realize it's your skin color doesn't play a role. It's got to do with your depth as a human being, how you feel about other people, what your worldview is. Do you think people are valuable? Do you think people are important? Does skin color matter? All of those things. And so for me, I mentioned very clearly in the book that I'm a Christian. So obviously part of that worldview means that when I look at another human being, irrespective of where they are in the world, I see them as a valuable person made in God's image. So I'm not going, oh, these black people this, or oh, these white people this. I'm actually going, oh, hold on a second. We're all human, man. We've all got the same sickness. We've all got the same disease. We're all judgmental, and we all fall short of how we should be as human beings. As people, we should be loving our neighbor. We should be kind. We should be full of compassion and grace and all these virtues that are ideals. But there's something in all of humanity that knows that that's right. Because we don't generally, no matter which culture you go to, we don't generally reward wrong behavior. And let me explain. Like most cultures don't like selfishness. You know what I mean? Like if you're a politician and you're stealing millions of pounds or dollars for yourself, most people will go, there's something wrong about that. Most people, I think, don't like cheaters, people who cheat. Most people, it's weird because Hollywood kind of confuses us by, making bank robbers look glamorous. you know what I mean? And people who steal cars look cool and
Ocean's 11
look cool. You know what I mean? Yeah, So there's this confused message to the world that says, it's good if you're a liar and a thug and a thief, and you murder people and you shoot them with big guns.
The Robin Hood syndrome.
Yeah. But it's not always the Robin Hood syndrome. But what I'm saying is, most people know, you go from culture to culture, there's certain things that are ubiquitous to most cultures. People don't like selfish people. They don't like people who hurt them. But also, on the other hand, human beings have a common nature, which is to look out for number one first. Now, my whole worldview is different to that. Like I think my story illustrates the kind of person I am. I hope it does. Anyway, I went to good schools. I had good values imprinted on me. I was given leadership opportunities. And there are lots of poems that you mentioned and pieces of prose that we talk about that are all talking about good values that human beings should have. You should be kind. You should be respectful. You should think of other people. You should defend people who can't defend themselves, like the little person, like I did with Nkala, or the person who doesn't have a voice when their president is oppressing them. I've literally showed that by my actions, that I actually care about the little guy who doesn't have a voice. That's how I've always been. I don't know why it's there. It's just in me, right? So not everyone is wired like that. There are some people who think of self-preservation first. And I always felt like, so as I started to look around a little bit carefully at this group, so I'm looking at the black people, and the black people are hating on the white people. They want to kill them. They're taking their farms, they're stealing from them. I was able to step back from that situation and ask the question, but like, who's going to feed the nation now? Like these farmers are doing a good job. You might not like them. They might call you derogatory names, but they're still feeding you. And there's that saying, don't bite the hand that feeds you, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm looking over here and I'm seeing these white folk, and they're obviously being racist. They're being antagonistic to their black neighbors. And I'm thinking, well, you guys, there's a lesson for you to learn too here, right? Like, this is not your country anymore. Before I left, there was something like 300,000 Zimbabwean white people and 14 million in the whole population. So what does that tell you? They're the minority. You can't walk around acting like you own the place when Mugabe is telling you he'll take your farm, right? So you got to act a little bit more respectfully. Treat your fellow man as an equal, as a peer, and then it might go well for you. Because some people kept their farms because they treated other people well. But what I'm saying is, of course, I was on a journey myself of self-discovery. And the biggest question I've always asked myself is, what kind of person do I want to be? And I talk about this a number of times. And I talk about, there was a song that Mrs. Sher, Darby Sher, I mentioned her. She's the teacher that I've revisited much later on in life to track her down and see where she was at, to thank her for the kindness she showed me when I was a little boy. And she taught one of the school classes a song. It wasn't my class, but it was called Fill the World with Love, and it's from a film called Goodbye, Mr. Chips. So it's really old. It's like one of the 50s, I think. And so I learned that song and I loved it, and it's become a hymn for me. It's like the chorus of my life. When I leave planet Earth, I don't care about cricket wickets. No one, 20 years from now, even evidence of this interview is that you said at the beginning, not a lot of people will know who you are because they're very young. So 20 years after you've played, people might not even know who you are. You can walk into a room and you're forgotten. And what I've always been taught is there's something more permanent than the achievements. So something more permanent than achievement is, for example, leaving people thinking you defended them. Actually going out there and spending your life helping other people. So like I spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe helping with an orphanage. And because I know those things have value beyond my life. I might die, but I might have inspired some kid to go on well in life. And so I don't want to get too spiritual, but I'm saying from a spiritual perspective, as a person, I think there are things that are more important than taking wickets or scoring runs. When you look at how the country was being destroyed by corrupt officials, and kids can't go to school because of the looting and the plundering and the corruption, or the healthcare system is being destroyed, or things like that. There were lots of opposition members of the MDC who were thrown in prison on trumped-up charges by the government abusing its power. All of those things got me to a place to look at the whole situation in Zimbabwe as someone who wanted to defend the good things in Zimbabwe. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about is I wrote a song. After I went to India, I went on a tour of India in, I think, 2001, and I wrote this song called Our Zimbabwe, which was a song all about glorifying the country and how we were all together living in harmony. It was a place of peace, because those are the values that I wanted to put out there. I wanted to put out into the universe a lot of positivity, national patriotism, things like that.
Seem to have been inspired by This Land Is Your Land, right? The Woody Guthrie's famous song. It's similar to...
No. Well, the words are sort of, but...
Okay.
I write in the book that it was mainly inspired by a song called Anthem from the musical called Chess.
Okay.
Sir Tim Rice. But yes, the producer who put the music together and helped with some of the lyrics may well have got his inspiration from there. I can't say. Anyway, but you put all of that together and you've got a young man, I was 25, 26, who's thinking, someone has got to speak out against this rubbish in our country. We're so divided, man. We're fighting each other. And like I said, I don't think there was anyone else well-placed in Zimbabwe to speak like I did, because I had been literally on both teams. I'd been with the white-only team at the beginning of my career, and I'd been with a black-only team at the end of my career. And I could look at both groups and say, hey, you guys got something to learn. And the funny thing is, so obviously then the Black Armband protest comes and the opportunity comes. And Andy Flower was actually one of my biggest opponents throughout that whole period. He was captain when the whole Neil Johnson thing happened. And in addition, he kind of, his anger was very evident against me. And again, it's the thing I don't mention in the book. I'm very clear in saying senior players. But anyway, if you hear me say senior players, that's code. There was only
I guessed Andy Flower pretty, because by the end of it, when you talk about your relationship with him, it's pretty obvious that Yorkshire, he was part of that Yorkshire incident as well. Yeah.
No, he didn't say anything horrible, Andy didn't. But he was the captain.
Yeah, he was the captain then. Exactly.
So he could have either said, okay, what's your side of the story? And I could have told it. And he could have gone, okay, right. If he said that and he said, yeah, okay. But he didn't. He kind of thought I was the center of it. And so did the manager. They thought I kicked it all off, which I didn't. Anyway, so all of that to say, yes, it is quite extraordinary that I would then team up with Andy Flower, a man whom technically I shouldn't have. I mean, I think on paper I shouldn't have worked with him. But I've always been one person to look beyond put it this way, I was happy I was able to look beyond our little skirmish that I felt we had. Even Dave Houghton. Dave Houghton, with all the stuff that happened with him, I'll go and have a beer with Dave. You know, even Heath Street. I've had my run-ins with Heath. I'll go and have a beer with him. I'm not that kind of person. But if you keep doing something like that to me, then of course, eventually I'm like, every time I'm in your presence, I feel hurt. So I'm not going to hang out with you. But I'm a pretty easygoing guy and easy to forgive. So I'm easy to forgive. So I should rephrase that. I find it easy to forgive, I should say. Not I'm easy to forgive. Maybe people find it hard to forgive me. But
yeah, I mean, I think the quote that speaks the best in the book, to me, at least what I gathered about you and your personality of the book, is the famous quote by Reinhold Niebuhr, which says, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
That's right. So we had a deputy headmaster who used to say that every time he was on assembly. So I was at my high school for like 6 years, and he said it all the time. So that was seared into our brains. But those are the kind of values, you see, that I had imprinted on me as a young man. And I'm not sure that everyone else in the team, or I should say teams, necessarily shared my viewpoint. And on top of that, and I mentioned this as well in the book, I lived with white guys. Even when all of this was hitting the fan and I was talking about farms being invaded, I lived with a guy who owned a farm. So it's not like, people can't throw it, the accusation my way that I was, totally ignorant of what was going on this side of the fence or that side of the fence. Oh no, I saw both sides. And maybe that was my problem. I think people like to know which box to put you in.
Yeah.
And I was just far too sort of in the middle and too reasonable about the way I saw things. And maybe that meant the problem with that is I got shot by both sides. So both sides turned on me.
Yeah, that's the tragedy. But I must mention here, you spoke about you spoke about your best placed. You were best placed because you saw the racism from both sides. But given the condition in Zimbabwe, you spoke about the targets in Zimbabwe. You spoke about, and you yourself was an icon. I mean, the first black cricketer to play for Zimbabwe is not something to be taken lightly. You were actually, everything was going for you. I mean, had you not done that protest, you could have actually gone on to have not only a much longer career, but your standing in Zimbabwe cricket could have been so much more enhanced, and you would have been given everything on your platter. But yet,
potentially,
potentially.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's possible I could have played on for another 5 or 6 years, But looking back, I obviously also know that I wasn't the greatest player, and they were starting to sort of think that, maybe I was over the hill, blah, blah, blah. And one of the ironies is during that last World Cup, I was actually bowling. I was back, I think, in my humble opinion, to my 98 form. I was actually strong. I'd gone to the gym. I was bowling well. So, and in fact, about a month before the World Cup, I took 6 wickets for 28 against Kenya. Yes, I know they're not the greatest cricketing nation, but only a few months later, they were in the semis?
Semi-final,
Yeah, they were in the semis. So that same team, I got 6 wickets for 28 against them, and that's what actually got me into the World Cup squad. I was out of the squad. People wouldn't believe this, but although I got picked for the last 14 or 15, whatever it was for the World Cup squad, I wasn't in the top 30 until I took those 6 wickets for 28.
Correct. You're right about that.
They hadn't. See, so they'd already started to write me off. So I'm not saying that caused me to do the stamp, but I'm just saying there was nothing compelling me to believe that I had a long future in Zimbabwe cricket.
Okay.
So you may be right, but perhaps on the other hand, Um, there was that in 2004. Remember, Heath Streak and a number of other
15
white
players.
Yeah, they all resigned and then got fired.
Yeah,
and Zimbabwe cricket started from scratch, basically with a young team, mainly black. And at that time we also lost some players. Like you'd think, okay, Nkala and Dion Ibrahim will come to the fore, but no, they didn't hang around much longer after that. So it's very possible I would have been a victim of that purge as well, because they decided.
Yeah, sure, possible. But I'm trying to highlight the difference.
I get your point.
I'm trying to highlight the difference between Andy Flower's position and yours. Andy Flower was at the end of his career. He had decided that would be the last World Cup. He was going to move to England. His family was going to move there. He had everything planned for what was going to come, and so he took the stand. I mean, not taking anything away from him. Andy Flower did a great thing by taking that stand. But I'm saying for you, I'm trying to understand the process of taking that risk with no plan B. And the next thing you know, you're getting death threats.
I know. You see, the thing is, it's almost impossible for me to convey that in the very center of my being, as the process played out, I just knew it was the right thing to do. I can't say it any more stronger than that. I just knew it was the right thing to do. I did not want to go down in history as someone who saw my fellow man suffering, struggling, being oppressed, and being silent. That's the whole the quote by Edmund Burke: "All that's necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing." My motivation was, I will not be silent. I will not be one of the people who does nothing. And it may cost me. Now, there was half of me that also thought, healthy debate is permitted in Zimbabwe. You were allowed to hold a political opinion in Zimbabwe without getting killed for it. I was obviously wrong and mistaken, but there was a part of me that thought, you know what, I can still live here and I'll make this protest, but people have done this kind of thing before and carried on. So that was definitely some naivety from my 26-year-old mind. I thought Zimbabwe actually, you see, and here's the irony, Zimbabwe will say, no, we are a democracy. We do tolerate dissenting voices. Just don't do it here. So on the one hand, they say they're a democracy, but the minute that democratic values are demanded of them, they prove by their actions that they're not. And I'm not even talking about election controversies, the brutality of the Mugabe regime against its own people. I'm just talking about people being free to express themselves, which actually is defended in the Constitution. We as Zimbabweans have freedom of speech enshrined in the Constitution. But of course, in reality, you can say what you like in Zimbabwe, but we'll kill you if you say what we don't like.
And then there is this extraordinary scene with which you begin the book. There is this match against Pakistan that is about to happen. And had that match happened and had Pakistan beaten Zimbabwe, then Zimbabwe don't go into the Super 6 stage, which means they don't go to South Africa, which means you continue to live in Zimbabwe, which could be basically a complete threat to your life.
Who knows? Who knows? So what I do know is that there was a minister, I won't name him, but a minister was overheard in his office saying, that Olonga guy thinks he's so clever. Just wait till the World Cup's over and we'll sort him out. And put it this way, this minister is a man who is known to have blood on his hands. There's every chance that I could have been imprisoned. They would have found a reason because they're very good at that. And indeed, I think my life in Zimbabwe would have been very difficult after that. I don't think I would have been able to stay. I would have had to flee into exile anyway if I were to preserve my life or live what people would call a normal life. So, in a nutshell, yes, I agree that match was pivotal. But that's why I appeal to my faith, and I talk about how that was divine intervention from my opinion. In my opinion, I believe that there was something quite miraculous that happened there, in that there was a cyclone which came from Mozambique. And if you look at the path, you can even go to Wikipedia and you can type in Cyclone Japheth, and there's an image of the path that it went. And I kid you not, it was going straight for Bulawayo. Of course, it didn't get to Bulawayo, but it created enough rain to get the match abandoned as a draw, and we got the points in place of England and Pakistan. So that was really a crucial moment in my life in determining what would happen next. And then we got to South Africa, and of course, we were never going to qualify further than the Super 6 stage, because just the way they structured the points in that World Cup, I can't remember if it was Super 6 or Super 8, but whatever it was just the points you took in against any other opponents that went through were the points you carried. So if you beat all the other 3 countries that went through in your group, in your side of the pool, then you took. That's why Kenya made the semis. They could have lost every match in that round and then got through to semis. It was because they went in with so many points, because they'd beaten all the other sides that got through with them.
Yeah.
So we went, even if we won every single match, I think we were out of it. And so that's when I obviously started to make plans to.
And then there was the Zimbabwe secret police for watching these games as well.
That's right. There was two things that happened. My fiance at the time ended the relationship. Now, she was a relative of Mugabe's. She was a niece or something like that. So I don't blame her. There's no hard feelings with her making that decision. But in a weird, perverse way, it actually helped me make the decision a lot quicker that I wouldn't be going back to Zimbabwe. So that happened maybe 2 nights or the night before the final match against Sri Lanka in East London. Yeah. Maybe East London. And then the next day, the secret police were at the game. Like the one of our bodyguards, if you can call him that, came to me and he said, "Listen, I don't want to alarm you, but I've just heard there's 6 secret police from Zimbabwe who are in the VIP box." I was like, really? 6 secret police in the VIP box? Like, what would they be doing here? So the conclusion I drew was that they were definitely they were there for no good. They were probably there to escort me back to Zimbabwe. I could be wrong. I will not say with absolute certainty that was the case. Yeah. They were there to pick us up. But for me, it was strange. I had never, ever seen secret police, that many secret police in a foreign country at any of my matches. And I'd played for 8 seasons. It was bizarre. So that's when I decided I was going to announce my retirement from world cricket because of death threats and secret police, etc. Issues still in Zimbabwe. I wrote another statement. I'd been told by Aussies Vute not to release any more statements, but hey, it was my last hurrah. So I threw my hat in the ring and decided to go out with a bang.
I find that more extraordinary because people forget that. You actually put out 2 statements in that World Cup and both were as powerful as each other. But people have forgotten the second one, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that was it. It was basically confirming some of the earlier things that we talked about, but just a little bit more of a definitive. Right, this is the end. I'm leaving cricket. I can't carry on. It's untenable. I've got death threats. I can't go back. And so that was the start of my new life. And then of course they got very petty. So the Zimbabwe manager, Babu Memon, had the drugs unit come and get me to give a urine sample, just so, to see if they could find something in my system to leave
so
me
that they could nail you.
Yeah, I assume they found nothing because they'd never been in touch with me and never written about it. But I didn't take any drugs or anything, So, and then the manager was told by Ozias Vute, who was now the big cheese. That same guy I spoke to in a parking lot, who was a nobody in Zimbabwe cricket, in the space of 2 years, went from a nobody to running the sport, to basically telling the manager to kick me off the team, give me my air ticket, and I was on my own. I wasn't even allowed to go on the coach with my teammates to the airport the next day. They wanted me to pay my own hotel bill. Man, it was just like, wow, they just everyone turned against me. And then I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go hang out with people who want me. So I phoned up a pastor friend of mine in Johannesburg who got me to stay with the most extraordinary family called the Webb family. They were Americans. They hosted me for about a month or so at no cost. I hung out with them. I went to Cape Town with them on a road trip. And then by this stage, I'd already started talking with the British people. There were some really good people in England who wanted to help me get over to get refuge there. I didn't go as a refugee or an asylum seeker. I wanted to work. So they got me to, they organized a work permit. I was going to work for the BBC and Channel 4 to do some commentary that year. And I was also going to work on a more substantial work permit with the Lashings World 11, which is a touring cricket team that travels around the UK.
And then there was this super rich man who was benevolent enough to fund your ticket, and through his private jet or something.
Well, yes, you've got some of it. So a man. So incidentally, one of the people who helped me get over to England was a man called Tony Brennan. He was with the Foreign Office in London. Lovely man. He ended up becoming a dear friend, and sadly he passed away. If not last year, the year before. And this gentleman who I'm about to tell you about, he's also dead. So there's just I told you, there's so many people who passed on. So a man had watched me give an interview on TV and he wanted to help me. So I'm cutting a long story short, but this man was called Vernon and he wanted to help. And he got in touch with me. He somehow tracked my phone down, and only 3 people in the world knew my phone number. So I was, of course, very, very nervous as to how he got my number. But he said, it's okay. I want to help you. I've heard your story, and I've talked to my boss, and he's keen to help you. So I walked. They sent a chauffeur, took me to these offices. They were called Inter-Air. In fact, let me just back up a little bit. So after all the work permit stuff was sorted out, I knew that I wanted to go to England. The gentleman, David Fulb, who ran the Lashings World 11, which is the team I ended up with for about 9 seasons, he said, just get yourself over here. So he was going to pay for my accommodation and he was going to give me a salary, but I needed to fly myself over. Now, the big problem was I didn't have money. The money I had was my lunch money that the management had given, for the last month that I'd been in South Africa, or weeks, however long it was. I'd saved up a bit, but it wasn't enough to buy an air ticket. And so I would have to travel to an ATM machine about, a kilometer or a mile away from where I was staying with the Webb family. And I'd have to do that maybe 10 to 15 times. I can't remember. And on maybe the 5th day, I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, it would be easier if someone just bought me an air ticket. So anyway, I went back and there was a voicemail message, and that's how Vernon got in touch with me. And then I got back in touch, and that's how I got to the office. So I got to the office. I was chauffeur driven in a Mercedes-Benz, beautiful car. Vernon introduced me. He said, "You want to have a cup of coffee?" And I think I might have said yes. And I started looking around at pictures on the man's wall. and there were pictures of this man standing next to George Bush Sr., and then another picture of him next to George Bush Jr. And of course, these were official photos in front of the American flag, like in the Oval Office. So I was thinking, who is this man?
And as you said, thankfully, there was no photo of him with Mugabe.
So I thought, man, whoever this is, he's obviously got a bit of clout. And I didn't know if he was Secret Service, intelligence, CIA. I didn't know who he was. But anyway, he walked into the office. He's a big man. He's a tall man, taller than me. Wore a nice, smart suit. And he spoke with a very thick American accent. And he said, "Are you the guy who ticked off Mugabe?" I said, "Yes, sir, that's me." He said, "Well, I want to help you." And then he goes on to tell me a couple of stories. He told me that when he was a young man with a young family, he lost all his money in a bad deal. And that this gentleman helped him. He didn't tell me who it was, but I suspect it might have been George Bush Jr. or one of them. I don't know. That's just my suspicion. I don't know. Anyway, he said the second story was, and this man gave him a loan. He gave him a loan for $5,000 or something like that. And he said, "Don't pay me back, just pass it along. The next person who you see who needs help, pass it along." So he did tremendous work. He did tremendous work with HIV victims in South Africa, and he also had a website called passitalong.com, I think it was. In any case, the last story he told me is of how he lived in Zambia. He started an airline there, and the president of Zambia, Chiluba, wanted half of his company. And he said, "No, I'm not going to give you half his company." He said, "Okay, I'll throw you in jail." So he said he knows what it's like to have to leave a country because the president is after him. So he said, "I want to help you." He said, "What do you need? Do you need money? Do you need an air ticket? I'll help you get to wherever you need to get to." And of course, I was blown away because I'd only a day or so before I'd thought it would be easier if someone bought me an air ticket. So I said to him, "I don't need money. I think I'm okay with money, but if you could get me an air ticket to fly to London, that would be amazing." So he said, because by this stage, I had my visa and my passport, etc. He said, "You come back on Tuesday, we'll fly you out to London." And with that, he shook my hand and he walked out. I never saw him again. He died in a plane crash in the mid-2010s, some 2015, 2016.
Ironically, in a plane crash.
He did. He used to love his flying. And he crashed in New Mexico or something like that. Just recreational flying. So he kept his word, man. He flew me over. I went to England. I started a new life. I actually got in touch with Vernon many, many years later. He actually lives in Melbourne here in Australia. And I asked him for the full story about, and I recorded it. I haven't released it. But
oh, wow. That would be great to hear.
It was a lot more political than I thought. See, I thought he'd just seen it on TV or something, but actually it was a bit more political and involved. So I don't know when the right time will be. Maybe the sequel to my book, maybe. Blood, Sweat, and Treason 2.
So Henry, have you gone back to Zimbabwe ever, Henry?
I haven't. I've never been back.
Oh, wow. And what do you make of that? I mean, you said this, you spoke your mind, you said something because you believed in it, and then you've never got a chance to go back to your country again.
Yeah, well, you won't believe how many Zimbabweans hate me, man. You have no idea how not everyone thinks that what I did was the right thing. There's so much vitriol that comes my way from Zimbabweans who I thought I was representing, who make it very unlikely that I will go back. Rightfully so, someone will turn to me and say, "Well, it's not everyone. Surely you have some admirers in Zimbabwe," and I guess I do. But I've moved on. I've got a couple of kids here in Australia. They were born in England. I've got an Australian wife. We live here. This is home. I live in Adelaide. I love this country. I became a citizen a few a few months ago, not even a few, yeah, it's about a month or so now. This country's been very kind to me. They've opened their arms up wide open, same as England. England was good to me. And I've kind of, in my heart, I've sort of moved on from Zimbabwe. A lot of people don't understand. It was 20 years ago. You know, the Zimbabweans didn't want to give me a new passport. They made it very clear I wasn't a citizen. I write about this in my book. It's the last chapter that I write about. And so I moved on. I really did. Do I still love Zimbabwe? Of course. I still watch them when they play. But I feel resoundingly rejected by them. Resoundingly rejected by them. I feel many people misunderstood what I was doing, who I was representing. Many people don't understand, and I'm glad you get this, that I didn't have to do this. I didn't need to do it. And I know I didn't need to do it. But I think it's an important part of being human that you say something when you see evil in the world. At least I hope it is. And so for me, I would at least have hoped that some Zimbabweans understood the price that I paid and that I could have just actually continued as a cricketer, enjoyed my life. I would have, as I said earlier, I don't know how many more years I would have had. It's possible I could have been a legend in Zimbabwe right now. It's possible I could be adored and loved by everyone, and I could be very wealthy with my life beyond cricket. But I chose the hard road because it seemed like the right road to me. And, it's a shame. Zimbabwe is struggling even now. Just recently, there was a documentary put out by Al Jazeera about gold smuggling and how billions of dollars are being lost from the economy because of the corruption. And it's the same stuff that we dealt with in the early 2000s, the same stuff.
In fact, recently I Googled the Zimbabwe news, and I saw how opposition leaders were being, again, they were being victimized, they were being put...
So here, it's interesting you bring this up, right? I write about this in my book, that one of the things that really impacted me before the Black Armband protest was a black politician called Job Sikala being beaten up by the army. The army came, if I'm not mistaken, he might have had a pregnant wife. They beat him up, and I think they threw him in prison. They might not have. That same man was just thrown in prison the other day.
Oh, seriously?
The same man. If you Google Job Sikala or Job, Jobsikhala, you will find that he's back in prison, man. The same man who 21 or so years ago was an inspiration for the Black Armband protest is back in prison.
Oh, wow.
So on the one hand, he shows he's got tenacity. And on the other hand, it just shows that ZANU-PF is a leopard that doesn't change its spots, man. They're the same. Same nonsense they were doing a while back, they're still doing.
So what is this effect then? In your book, in the last chapter, which is a fantastic crystallization of everything that you've written before and cricket and politics, you say that it's like throwing darts at an elephant, right? I mean, ultimately, do you ever look back and say, nothing has changed? Or do you just say it's what you felt was right and you did what was right?
I think as a young person who had optimism in his heart, I honestly felt that positive change could come out of it. Obviously, I didn't do it hoping for negative things to happen. But I truly believed that there would be some kind of galvanizing around the idea of people living together in harmony, working together, the powers that be not abusing their power, etc. I really did believe in it. I still believe in it as a concept, as an ideal. People write songs about this, don't they? Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, Ebony and Ivory living together in harmony. We chuckle about it, but it's got a great message, It's like in a country like Zimbabwe, where we've got this torrid history of racial segregation that goes back to the 50s and 60s, and Mugabe was thrown in prison. Another guy, Joshua Nkomo, was thrown in prison. They were bright minds and they lost a lot of their youth trying to do the right thing. They came to power, at least Mugabe did, and he got corrupted. And one of the funniest things is, I talk about this, when was it? Yes, it was the 5th Brigade. So when the 5th Brigade started raiding Matabeleland and killing people.
Yeah, the massacres.
The massacres. Mugabe brought, do you know what rule he used? He used the laws that governed a state of emergency that were put in place by Ian Smith, his predecessor, in 75, I beg your pardon. 1975. The same law that the same rule that he fought against. When he made it into power, he just used the same laws to oppress his people that the other guy used to use.
Yeah.
And it just makes you wonder, like, what was independence all about? You know, after it's all said and done, I think there was an optimism that I held, which might have been misplaced. Because I honestly thought Zimbabweans will see that I'm fighting for them. I'm not fighting for myself. For me to fight for myself, I'll do what some of these white cricketers did. I'll just think about preserving my life, preserving my livelihood, my farm, my whatever. I didn't do any of that. I was happy to lay it all on the table with a belief that human beings can actually fight for a higher cause. And I guess this is why movies like Braveheart or Gladiator really appeal to the human psyche. Is, remember how I said earlier, most cultures don't like selfishness, but most cultures appreciate and know self-sacrifice. And they think it's a good virtue. Unless you're Henry Olonga and you played cricket for Zimbabwe and you wore a black armband for your people. If that's who you are, they will hate you to the grave for doing that. Anywhere else in the world, people will say he was brave. He did what it was, governed by the power of his convictions. He laid it all down. He laid his own career down. But in Zimbabwe, we just do things differently. And don't misunderstand. I don't think I lost that much in the big scheme of things. Like, yes, I had to move on. There was a high price to pay, for sure. But I think I gained a lot by becoming a better person after cricket, post-cricket. Life's taken me in a totally different direction. And of course, I'm now a father. I'm a husband. I've got a lot of charities I support. I support a prison charity, so I visit prisons and I talk to prisoners. That's where my life is, man. Of course, I speak in schools. I've spoken in hundreds of schools, encouraging them about how to sift through what's important in life. Of course, I don't encourage people to wear black armbands against their leaders, but I certainly tell them to consider what's right. Because of course, you can live a life where you just go, you live for number one, you live to make lots of money, billions of dollars if you're capable. And even then, people will tell you, people who make it to the top of their profession, even in sport, people can and will tell you that, the honest ones anyway, there is somewhat an emptiness that carries over after all that success. And some people, as a result of that, don't know what to make of their lives after their careers. They can't define themselves beyond basketball, cricket, tennis, whatever it is, because it's so defined who they were. People recognize them as that tennis player. When it stops, people remember them for a few years, and then 20, 30 years down the line, you're forgotten. Unless you're invited to the Australian Open and everyone gives you a standing ovation. But from my perspective, I had none of that. Even now, I get none of that. I was never given a send-off. You know how they give you these?
Yeah.
I never given a send-off. I was never celebrated. I heard that there were some nets which were named in my honor in Bulawayo. And I heard they're in a state of disrepair. So maybe that sums up my cricket career.
It's quite an apt summation.
Yes, my whole legacy is a disheveled net somewhere in Bulawayo that nobody knows. I couldn't even Google it to find out where they are. I don't even know where they are.
I am laughing because this is such a tragedy and not because this is a comedy, by the way. But
I'm not offended, don't worry.
My final question to you is, 26-year-old cricketer today playing international cricket says that they are extremely saddened by what is happening in their country, whichever country it may be. They come to you and say, I want to speak up, but I'm not sure. What would you say?
you know, something like that kind of happened recently here in Australia.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes. So there's a rugby player called Israel Folau who put a scripture up on his Instagram account. And he copped a lot of flack for it because I think it was perceived as being anti-LGBTQI, all of that. And he ended up being sacked. And then he went to court and he got paid millions of dollars. And I was asked this question by a journalist, and I was surprised by my own answer. And I sort of said, knowing all that I know, I think he should just play rugby and just enjoy his career and be a shining light in the world of rugby.
What?
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And maybe, just maybe, it's the fact that I look back on my protest and I see that maybe perhaps I earned a little bit of respect from certain corners of the world, but the majority of them didn't get it. The majority of people didn't appreciate it, care for it, or understand it. And my fear to this 26-year-old person is whether the world will get them and understand what they're doing. Because I've done it. I've been there. I've walked through it. I've said my piece. I've dealt with the ramifications and the consequences. And although I would do it again, I don't know I would advise someone else to do it unless they are driven by the power of their convictions and they turn around to me and say, I have to do this. If they say, I have to do this, I'll be like, go for it. My prayers are with you. Good luck. And I wish you success, But I think a lot of us think we can change the world when we're younger. And then as we get older, we just realize that although that's a wonderful ideal to hold to, that really what you can do is you can change your little pocket, your sphere of influence around you. And that is enough. You don't have to change the world. You change the world for the people that get it. And this is why I would do it again, is there were enough people in the world that got it. And Mugabe stayed in power for another 14 years before he was deposed. He won another election in 2008, which of course was, it was overrun with accusations of vote rigging and all of that. Lots of people got tortured, murdered under his regime, even after I left. So nothing tangible perhaps changed, but you know what? I still got to do all the things I wanted to do in my life. I played international cricket. I don't know if you know, but I was on a competition here called The Voice, which is a singing competition.
I loved that video. It was amazing.
So I was on The Voice. I'm a father. I've got a couple of kids. I'm going to start releasing more music. I'm going to release the audiobook. And on top of that, I've gone back into athletics. I loved doing athletics when I was a young boy, and I could easily have gone into athletics. In the end, cricket dominated my life. But all the major loves in my life, I have done, except for athletics. So I still want to do more in the world of acting, perhaps. Maybe I'll do some homemade movies. I'm sure they'll be terrible, but maybe. But, looking back on my life, I don't feel like I am poorer because I didn't take 150 test wickets. It might have been nice to take another 100. It might have been nice to take another 100 one-day international wickets. But I don't think that after 150, I would have then felt satisfied. Because I think there's a saying in cricket, go big or go home, right? So whether I've taken 68 wickets or 100 or 200, I'm not in the conversation. I would have been in the conversation if I took 500 wickets. Do you understand what I'm saying? So for me, I dipped my toe into the world of cricket and I achieved some extraordinary things. I mean, I think I still have the best bowling figures in a one-day international at 6 for 19 against England. And I still think I've got the third best. Unless someone's done something more recently, I think that's true. And for a man who used to throw the ball at the age of 18, whose career should have ended after that, I'm actually quite happy with that. You know what I mean? I threw in another 3 or 4 match-winning performances to win for my country. It would be nice if I threw in another 10, but another 10 doesn't make me 10 times better as a cricketer because I'm not in the conversation of the greats. So 68 wickets, 58 wickets versus 300. Yeah, it's nice to be in the 300 club, I guess, because I know that cricket is all about statistics. But honestly speaking, it wouldn't make much of a difference to me. For me, what I can do is I can look back on my career and I can say, I had the opportunity to stand up for what was right, for something that goes beyond the cricket field. And I did it in the spirit of cricket. I did it in the spirit of cricket. I was able to do a number of things. One, I was able to look to this side, look at the white guys, look at the black guys, and stay in the middle and go, actually, everyone's losing here. Why don't we try and work together? I was able to look beyond my own circumstances and look at the bigger cause, which was to try and get Zimbabweans united. And you know what? I don't think of it as a great loss. So I think looking forward, I'm still energetic enough for another 10 to 15 years to continue doing all the things that I felt I might have missed out on. So like, if I want to play cricket, I could. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff happening in the world at the moment. There's masters leagues and all sorts of things going on, If I really want to indulge myself in that, I could. Although, like I said, my desire right now is in athletics, and in particular, throwing the javelin. I was inspired by Mr. Chopra at the last Olympics. So you might see me in the Masters competition here in Adelaide, which is happening in November. And it's the Australian Masters, so over 30s. And I want to used to when I was a boy, trying to get into the national side. I'm going to do gym. I'm going to get strong. And I want to see how it goes. So watch this space. I'll obviously put it up on.
That would be quite a circle, Henry. Called for chucking in your very first test, and then actually chucking the javelin to glory you.
Why not? That's the perfect way to finish my story. If I get gold at the Australian Masters in the javelin, I can retire and I can die. I'll be a happy man.
Fantastic. We wish you all the best for that. You spoke about go big or go home. That might not have happened in terms of your overall cricket career, but on that particular World Cup, trust me, from a purely moral point of view, you really went big and sadly couldn't go home, but you went big for sure.
Yes, I see what you did there.
Well,
that's very good, actually. No one has ever pointed that out to me.
You went big, but didn't go home.
Never did go home.
Henry, I have to finish with this poem that you quote, which I think captures your whole sort of stance, your career, your outlook as a person and everything so well. This is the poem Risk by Leo Buscaglia, who was this famous, educator and poet from America. But this is such a beautiful poem.
Can I just say?
Yes.
And I'm doing this I'm putting the minor correction in my audiobook. I think the actual original author of it was a lady called Janet Rand.
Oh, really?
It might actually be credited to her rather than Leo Buscaglia. But go ahead.
Okay, let me just say it's a poem called Risk You can figure out who wrote it. I'm sure like there's plenty of Google and other sources that will help you. But just the essence of the poem is so beautiful. I'm starting to quote it. To laugh is to risk being a fool. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. To express feelings is to risk exposing your true self. To place your ideas, your dreams before the crowd is to risk their loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To try is to risk failure. The person who risks nothing does nothing, has nothing, and is nothing. They may avoid suffering and sorrow, but they simply cannot learn, feel, change, grow, love, or live. Risks must be taken because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. Only a person who risks is free. End of quote. So, Henry, thank you so much. Inspiring
My
book.
pleasure.
Terrific book on so many aspects. Please pick it up. Please listen to the audiobook, which is the expanded version of the book where Henry has added many other things. I will put a link to that. Please follow Henry. He's on Twitter, and I'm sure you can get all the news about the latest happenings in his singing circles and javelin circles and everything else that he's doing there. And thank you. It's a great honor. I mean, rarely have I had such an enriching conversation on this podcast on matters beyond cricket. We usually talk a lot about cricket and, we have a number of guests on the show, but this has been extremely rewarding for me to talk to a cricketer about matters so important and so fundamental to the way we live. Thank you so much.
Thank you, mate.
Regular reminder that 81allout.com is our website. At 81allout is our Twitter handle. Please rate and review us. It really helps our podcast. And I'll put links to some of the books we've republished recently. Gideon Hayes' Summer Game is something that we came out with recently, a classic that he published in 1997. Mike Marquis's War Minus the Shooting and Mike Coward's Cricket Beyond the Bazaar are the previous two books we've put out. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll join you soon in about a week's time for the next episode.
India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wide.